Welcome to another edition of Crime News with Mark Solomon. It's Sunday, September 19, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the Gabby Petito case and Brian Laundrie. Stay tuned. But before we get to that, don't forget to click like and subscribe with a little bell next to it to be notified of future videos. If you're into that sort of thing, you want to see fresh new content all the time, click that bell. You'll be the first. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the lead up to why I'm doing this video today. Yesterday, now granted, I've been following the Gabby Petito case and her disappearance back on August 25th, and the suspicious nature of her boyfriend at the time, Brian Laundrie. What I saw yesterday was a pretty good video by Dr. Todd Grande. He did a 12 or so minute video on a great background of the facts, and he raised 6 points that I wanted to go over today. But before we do that, let's just do a little bit of background ourselves so that everybody who's watching this channel understands what we are talking about. Gabby Petito is an Instagram poster who, with her boyfriend Brian Laundrie, set out on a cross-country trip, and they posted their exploits from the East Coast to the, well, they didn't quite get to the West Coast. They did, however, get through Colorado, where I'm located, and they ended up in Utah. Moab. Now, interestingly enough, there was another terrible double homicide in Utah on August 17 that's unsolved. A couple who was camping was last seen on the main street of Moab. They had reported to their friends and family that they were having an issue with a creepy stalker-like person and that they were going to be moving. So the next thing they did was they disappeared. There was some concern that the Gabby Petito disappearance was related. However, I can tell you, I saw in an article just yesterday, and remember, the links are in the description below. Here's the Salt Lake Tribune that the authorities have ruled out the link between the Gabby Petito case and the couple killed in Moab. So in other words, they're fairly comfortable that Kylan Schulte and Crystal Turner's deaths not related to Gabby Petito's disappearance. So let's get back to her. She was last heard from on August 25th. There were two interesting text messages that apparently her mother had some doubts as to whether or not those text messages were from her daughter. Apparently they were different enough and just suspicious enough to where her mother did not believe that those texts were coming from her. Interesting, because it was just after that Brian Laundrie decided to fly from Utah back to Florida, where they started. And after he left Utah, there were no other communications from her whatsoever. We talked about this a little bit in the Barry Morphew case. In other words, that's a murder case here in Colorado where the wife was just missing, gone, and all of her friends and family didn't hear from her after this one particular night. And after a lot of investigation, the district attorney's office decided to go ahead and charge Barry Morphew with her murder and the tampering with the human body because they never found it. In that case, the trail ran cold, and that was their case. That's how they went ahead and charged him with the murder. And the probable cause was just found literally 2 days ago on the 17th. And he is now being charged in her murder in the same type of circumstance that Brian Laundrie is now facing in Gabby Petito's case. Here comes the legal analysis. The Barry Morphew case, there was absolutely no evidence to suggest that Suzanne Morphew, the victim, ever left the state of Colorado, and that the entire crime would have, could have, and should have happened here in the state of Colorado. That's what gives the Colorado courts over Barry Morphew jurisdiction. They have to have jurisdiction. They have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the crime happened in Colorado. Otherwise, the Colorado courts can't prosecute them. In Gabby Petito's case, it's a little bit different because this couple was traveling quite a bit. And while They were transient. In other words, they were moving in their makeshift van slash camper. There was plenty of evidence to suggest that she might not be in Utah anymore. And what if her disappearance happened in Wyoming or Colorado or any other adjoining state? And so here it's going to give a prosecution a lot harder time to be able to prosecute Brian Laundrie if that's what they intend to do, because there's at least a lot of evidence that they were moving from state to state to state. And that, I think, is going to be a hurdle in prosecuting Brian Laundrie. And as another twist of interesting facts in his whereabouts, he went back to Florida and then made a statement. And right after that, that was a statement through his lawyer. And then he disappeared, claiming that he's not missing, he's in hiding. And that was his statement. I'm in hiding, she's missing, I'm in hiding. And this was an interesting article that I found saying that his family can't reach him and that he could hide in the Florida swamps for months. Also in this article, protesters are gathering outside his house, hoping to pressure him into cooperating with law enforcement. And then it came to light on Tuesday that he had left the house and they were searching for him in the park. North Fort Police Department in Florida announced that they were treating Ms. Petito's fiance as a person of interest, being investigated in Florida. They don't believe that her final text message actually came from her. That's a couple days after she was missing. They do have the body camera footage of the encounter that shows her crying in the domestic argument that they had, that the police officers started to intervene in, but then eventually let them go. So he is now in hiding. But back to the video that I saw yesterday. This is it. Again, links are in the description. And Dr. Todd Grande, really, really good video in 13 minutes and 51 seconds, goes over it all. You should watch that video. I'll put a card up so you can see that one. And he goes over a lot of great information, but mostly the points that I wanted to talk about from his video are these. He talked about how when a pair goes on a long trip with mental health problems, which there was evidence of, it's not ideal. And that led to a domestic dispute on August 12, where police were notified that there was a dispute between a man and a woman. They find the car that had left the scene and stop the car. They find Gabby Petito crying uncontrollably in the car, and Brian is the one who kind of talks them through the situation, and the officer essentially classifies this as a mental health problem, not as a criminal case, and he lets them go. And Dr. Todd Grande talks about how, things can be criminal and mental health. That doesn't have to be either or. I can attest to that. Literally, many, many, many mental health situations have become criminal and vice versa. I completely and totally agree with Dr. Todd Grande on that. If the police officers had done a little bit more follow-up, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But I'm not here to blame and point fingers. Number 3, it's unusual that Brian would fly back to Florida. Absolutely. And their trip, remember, they were going from Florida in their camper van to the West Coast. So his just pulling the plug and flying back to Florida, that does seem very, very strange. Number 4, Gabby could be alive, but all traces stopped. Remember, any type of missing person case, we have to look at the trail. And if all people in your life stop hearing from you, all of your financials stop, then it's a reasonable expectation to say that this person didn't just walk away from their life, especially in this case where you've got an Instagram person who has spent the last bunch of her time posting things online. And we'll see some interesting evidence about the last couple posts that were online. One of the things that they found was that almost every single one of her photos on Instagram were geotagged, but not her last 2 posts. And that's also very suspicious, like somebody trying to make it look like she's still around when she isn't. Okay. Number 5 is that Brian's behavior seems bizarre. That's the one we're going to focus on. And again, Mother has doubts that the last texts were Gabby's, and I've already talked about that. Let's shift gears and talk a lot about that number 5 point from Dr. Todd Grande. Why would Brian return to Florida without Gabby? Very, very, very suspicious act. In other words, they're traveling together. They're these pair of, pretty people posting on Instagram, gaining followers. And all of a sudden, not only does he go back to Florida, but he flies back without her. And that's when her trail runs cold. I feel that's more than bizarre. I think that's the best piece of evidence against Brian Laundrie at this point. Let's go to point number 2. He hasn't told anyone about her last location. And that's significant because, again, and we're going to talk about this in the next section too, it's in his best interest for her to be found alive. I totally agree with that point from Dr. Todd Grande. And when he is just silent, it makes people wonder what he knows and why isn't he giving that information to the police. But here we go. Here's the why. Why hire an attorney? Because remember, he hired an attorney to do his talking for him. And that's his right. And I agree with Dr. Todd Grande. It is his absolute right to have an attorney speak for him. And as a criminal defense attorney, I will always recommend that somebody speak through an attorney if they're going to speak at all. But I do take issue with the doctor saying that he's hiding behind an attorney. Remember, when you're the person of interest in a crime, or even when you think you're going to be a person of interest in a crime, you're not hiding behind an attorney. You're being protected. It's not about a cloak of suspicion. You've literally just hired an attorney because you need a shield to protect you against the might of the government, who is possibly or probably going to charge you with a very serious crime. Having an attorney is not something you're hiding behind. It's having protection and somebody on your side to be able to speak for you without repercussions. But it isn't helpful to the search that he's not giving a statement. And again, B, it's in his interest if she is found alive, absolutely. C, if he's not guilty, tell the police what happened. I used to do videos where every single time I used to say, remember, you have a right to remain silent. If the police ask you any questions about who you were, or where you are, or what you know, or anything, you have a right to say, I don't want to talk to you. And if they persist, I want a lawyer. That was the speech that I gave in every single one of my videos. I think about 100 of them before I started doing these news videos. And what I can tell you is, by saying that you don't want to talk, by saying you don't want to make a statement, you are protecting yourself from making admissions that could hurt you, even if you didn't do anything wrong. I've done more than one video where I talk about how if you're accused of sexual assault in a really simplistic way, the police basically have to prove two things. One is that there was sexual contact, and two, that the sexual contact was not consensual. So if you're talking to the police and you don't know what they know, and they say, well, we know you had sex, but we want to know where it was. And you said, well, it was over there. You've just helped prove half their case. Now they only have one thing left to prove, that it was not consensual, because you just admitted the sexual contact. So when anybody says, if you're not guilty of anything, talk to the police, what's the harm? And the answer is, you don't know what the harm can be, and that's what you're protecting yourself from. Okay. D, the concerns of false confessions. The doctor says, if you have concerns that you can be grilled by the police to the point where you make some sort of a false confession, and that's a concern of yours, bring your lawyer along. That way you can communicate the things that they want to know without that risk. And my experience says that if you bring a defendant to talk to investigators, they are not going to let the attorney do too much talking without ending the interview. And in fact, so many times I've given a statement to the police, and sometimes the police say, are you sure you want to do that, counselor? Because then you're going to make it into the report as a witness. And I say, no, that's not how that works. I am giving you information, but the confidentiality of the communication is still preserved. Sometimes, even when an attorney is trying to navigate this investigation process, it can be a minefield, and knowing where the landmines are is nearly impossible when you don't know what they know. The most interesting part of that video, I'd have to say, are the four possibilities he talks about in regards to what could possibly be Gabby's status. In other words, what the heck happened? And his first one is that she's still alive and she's in hiding somewhere or being held by somebody. I mean, either way, that's terrible. But at the same time, she's still alive. That's number one. Number two is that Brian Laundrie is the bad guy and did something bad to Gabby and then flew back to Florida. Number three is that some other bad guy came across Gabby Petito after Brian left or before, and Brian Laundrie is just a great patsy, but it's just happenstance that happened. And when you look at the bad things that happen in the world, I think that's definitely possible. Number four is that this whole thing is a hoax, and he does not believe it's a hoax. I personally don't know. And when you have the modern world of social media influencers, I would not be surprised if that was the case, but I'm with Dr. Todd Grande. I do not believe that's what's going on. But don't quote me on that. That could be wrong. There you have it. That's what I've got for you today. If you have any thoughts, feelings, or questions, love to hear them in the comments below. And until then, thank you so much for watching.